They say every American wedding begins with a fairy tale and ends with a receipt, but mine began with a subpoena and a coupon for a deluxe brake job. Picture a summer Saturday in a suburban civic center that smelled like gym floor wax and overcooked hot dogs from last night's Booster Club fundraiser. Folding chairs faced a rented arch that looked like it came free with a set of tires. In the front row sat my former in-laws, holding bouquets like evidence bags. At the end of the aisle stood my ex, the cheating wife who turned a tune-up into a long-term plan, in a body-hugging ivory dress that said, "I am new," while the grease under her fiancé's nails said, "I am not." The mechanic was handsome in the way a barbecue pit is handsome, solid and smoky, and dangerous if you get close during a flare-up. He wore a suit that tried to hide a lifetime of wrenches, but failed at the elbows where his sleeves bulged like stubborn lug nuts. The justice of the peace cleared his throat, flipped a script, and asked if there were any objections. It was the wicked kind of quiet you only hear in a small American town when everyone wants a scandal and dessert at the same time. That was my cue, the moment I had been promised by a lawyer, a therapist, a late-night talk radio host, and a man outside the post office who claimed to be with a secret federal bureau that investigates marital carburetors. He showed me a badge made of foil and an index card that said Bureau of Emotional Engines. He told me that betrayal is like low-grade gasoline. It knocks loudly if you listen. I heard it for a year straight. That is why I stood, dry palms on a manila folder, and said with a calm that startled me that I objected on grounds of financial absurdity, moral comedy, and a suspicion that the groom had entered a binding agreement with 3 alternators and a dream. The room gasped. You would have thought I parked a pickup in the aisle. My voice did not shake. I was done shaking. I had shaken when I discovered the infidelity in my own driveway under the familiar sound of a borrowed air ratchet. I had shaken when my wife said she had found her true self somewhere between a timing belt and a yes. I had shaken when she sent an invoice for a portion of her wedding because her therapist and a podcast said it would be healing for our family if I shared the cost. She explained that I was not paying for their romance. I was investing in a positive co-parenting narrative. This was betrayal packaged as a philanthropy campaign, with perk levels, and the top tier promised a personalized vow shout-out that included my middle name. I remember thinking that only in America could a cheating wife sell seasons of her love life like a streaming service and call it wellness. I then did what men do when their foundations shift and their garage smells like someone else's cologne. I started collecting facts with the zeal of a conspiracy theorist. Call it grief, call it obsession, call it my newfound hobby. I pulled bank statements and phone logs. I charted timelines on my basement wall with color-coded thread like a detective who shops only at office supply stores. I had columns for dates, gas stations, receipts with handwritten notes like late oil check, which is a phrase that should never appear twice in a healthy marriage. I interviewed neighbors as if they were witnesses in a friendly coup. I followed the scent of cheap coffee to the body shop where the mechanic tuned up a bug-eyed Chevy while telling my wife she was ethereal, which is not a word I expected from a man who can identify 19 engine noises blindfolded. He had a poet's mouth and a gambler's shoulders. She had a glow that turned every socket wrench into a wedding bell. When I finally asked her the question, she answered with a terrible kind of American honesty, the kind that has been rehearsed in a mirror. She said our love had gone stale like supermarket bread left open overnight. She said the mechanic loved her for who she was, not for the family calendar she kept, not for the slow quiet of Tuesday nights, not for the dutiful way she refilled the dog's bowl. In her mouth, who she was sounded like a mythical creature that required premium fuel and a man who could read spark plugs like tarot cards. I told her that infidelity is not a personality test. She said I sounded like a YouTube preacher who sells supplements. I told her that a cheating wife is not a diagnosis either. She smiled like a person who has discovered the secret switch in a magician's table. Then she left, rolling out of our driveway in a ride that shook the kitchen window because he had improved the exhaust, but not the neighbors. The neighbors clapped. It was summer, and everyone was on their porch pretending to water something. Here is where the parody of it all grew legs and ran like a sitcom. The mechanic's shop became a sanctuary for people who believed that marriage was a machine that could be upgraded if you were brave enough to swap parts in the dark. A Saturday morning coffee cart appeared next door. Someone painted a mural on the cinder block wall, a saint with a wrench and a neon halo. My children, when with me, asked if cars had souls. I said yes because I could not bear to tell them that grown-ups sometimes confuse torque with tenderness. Word spread that my wife was planning a wedding that would redeem every mile of her life and prove that what began as cheating could blossom into destiny if you sent the right email to the right vendors. Then she asked me to help fund it. I thought it was a prank until a spreadsheet arrived with categories and suggested contributions. Venue, flowers, cake, photographer, and an item labeled Conceptual Healing Experience, which cost more than my truck. I will not deny that a part of me wanted to say yes just to finish the story, to pay for it, like a ticket to the last episode of a series I did not choose. But another part of me, the stubborn part that wears a faded baseball cap and refuses to change the radio when a certain classic comes on, the part that believes family is not for barter and that betrayal cannot be whitewashed by a Pinterest board, stood up and told me to object properly. That is why at the Civic Center I did not shout. I simply described what I had discovered. I described the way she rewrote our history like a service manual with missing pages. I described the way he called her sweetheart in a voice that had soothed 1,000 rattles. I said this marriage was not a sacred covenant. It was a salvage title painted white. And in a moment that felt both theatrical and inevitable, the foil badge man slid into the back row and nodded like a coach who sees his team finally run the play as drawn. The justice of the peace blinked hard. My wife's face went pale, and then furious, and then something else, a private weather only she knew. The mechanic gripped the rings in his palm until his knuckles went white. The crowd leaned forward the way a crowd leans before a wreck at a small track, hoping for drama and praying for the mess to be someone else's. I did not ask for sympathy. I did not pass around photographs. I did not beg. I recited a timeline as if time itself were my witness. I said a cheating wife may find a new story, but the first story leaves fingerprints, and somewhere under a layer of shine is the truth of who left whom and when. Then I closed the folder. That is when the lights flickered as if a hand in the breaker box had doubts. A teenage cousin whispered that the building was haunted by the ghosts of pep rallies. Someone laughed, nervous. The justice of the peace asked me to sit. I did, knowing that my objection was not for him. It was for me, the man who learned that love can spin until the bearings scream, and that you can rebuild if you admit the damage and choose the right parts. There is a point after betrayal when the whole world looks like a stage set that a careless crew left in place. You start to notice the seams. You see the painted trees, the rented fences, the shadows of people who moved the scenery too fast. That autumn, after the Civic Center spectacle, where I objected like a sober Greek chorus, our small town shifted 2 clicks toward theater. Neighbors rehearsed their lines before knocking on my door with casseroles and gossip. My barber asked how I was holding up while he lined the back of my neck with the precision of a carpenter. My mother, a retired nurse who could wrap a wound blindfolded, wrapped her arms around me and told me that infidelity is a fever that breaks when it breaks. Not when you want it. To my father, a quiet man who says little and fixes everything, took me into the garage and handed me a dented toolbox. He said that I should keep busy until my mind decides to be kind. He told me that engines and hearts have different tolerances but the same need for clean oil. I began running at dawn, a slow mile that felt like I was pushing a truck in neutral. The mechanic's shop lights were always on when I passed. Inside, I sometimes saw my ex sipping coffee in a robe like a queen of sockets. It made my chest ache, and my mouth taste like metal. On Sundays, I visited a non-denominational church that had replaced pews with folding chairs and the choir with a man in jeans who played a guitar and said that forgiveness is the only fuel that does not burn out. I sat in the back and did not sing. I did not know how to pour that kind of fuel without lighting everything else on fire. After service, a woman with eyes like a rainy morning told me she was praying for my family. I thanked her and meant it, even as a stubborn part of me composed a counter-prayer that requested thunder. The wedding planning did not stall. It accelerated. My ex leaned into narrative like a podcast producer. She posted engagement photos that looked like soft drink commercials. The mechanic held her from behind in a meadow. His hands were clean, which felt like a lie, even if he had used a whole bottle of orange pumice soap. Captions used words like new beginning and courage and honest love. She never used the words cheating wife, betrayal, or infidelity, but those words hung over the heart emojis like storm clouds outside a parade. Friends who had once whispered now cheered. A local influencer who sells candles and advice declared the couple proof that sometimes the universe introduces you to the right person at the wrong time, and that you must follow your truth, which is a nice thought until you realize it is the kind of truth that ignores the lease you signed, the dog you adopted, and the family dinners that once felt like anchors and now feel like props. When the official request for me to fund parts of the celebration arrived the second time, this time through a lawyer who wore an expensive watch and a smile that did not include his eyes, I decided to meet the absurd with an equal and opposite force, an investigation that bordered on myth. The foil badge man from the Bureau of Emotional Engines reappeared, as if summoned by my stubbornness. He slid into the booth at a diner that smelled like syrup and old neon and told me the town had a secret. He said that for 100 years, every time a great betrayal happened, the soil under the old steel mill trembled and a mural appeared on a wall somewhere near the river. The mural told the story in symbols only the broken-hearted could read. He told me to look for a red fox, a silver key, and a wheel with 7 spokes. He said the fox is the liar, the key is the door to the next life, and the wheel is fate. I told him kindly that I did not have time for an art tour. He said fate does not care about schedules. He then ate my bacon without asking. I laughed, because what else can you do when your reality collects superstition the way a sweater collects burrs? I went to the river anyway. I walked the cracked path behind the mill and found, I swear to you, a fresh mural. A red fox trotted across a field of wrenches. A silver key floated above a house with 2 doors. A wheel with 7 spokes rolled toward a civic center that looked a lot like ours. It was beautiful and ridiculous and possibly meaningful. I stood there, a man with a new superstition, and felt the tight fist inside my chest loosen a notch. I decided not to pay for the wedding, and not because of the mural, but because I wanted to stop buying tickets to a show that forgot my name. I wrote a letter that was polite and final. I said that as a matter of self-respect and basic arithmetic, I would not fund a ceremony that grew from infidelity. I said I wished them health because health is cheaper than hospital bills. I said our family would find a new way to be a family that did not require me to underwrite a performance. The lawyer called me petty. The influencer posted a caption about small men with larger egos. The mechanic's mother cornered me in the produce aisle and told me that her son was not a villain, he was a rescuer, and that my wife had been adrift. I told her that rescuers usually call 911 before they cut the anchor line and sail away with the boat. She said love is not a maritime code. I said vows are. She threw kale into her cart like a verdict and turned away. That night, my daughter asked me why people think love is a story that other people can write for you. I told her that people love stories more than they love silence, and sometimes they will choose a noisy lie over a quiet truth because it has a better chorus. She nodded and said she prefers quiet truths but also enjoys karaoke. I told her that balance is the dream. Then the town turned its attention to the wedding as if it were a championship game. Rumors said a vintage car would carry the bride. Rumors said a famous food truck from the city would serve tacos under string lights. Rumors said the mechanic would promise to rebuild anything she ever broke. I heard a whisper that he had a surprise plan that would make the whole town forgive the way this love began. That last rumor came from the foil badge man, who claimed to have seen a blueprint. He said the mechanic had engineered a ring box that opened like a tiny hood, with a motor that made a soft purr, and that hidden inside was a handwritten apology to everyone who felt collateral damage. I told the badge man that apologies are not stage props. He said sometimes people need a stage to say the thing they could not say in a kitchen. I kept running. I kept working. I visited a therapist who had soft chairs and strong questions. She told me that anger is a raft with a leak, useful until you notice your feet are wet. She said grief is not a straight line. She said if I wanted to keep some conspiracy around me to make sense of the chaos, I should choose a kind one, like the idea that a future version of me had sent small mercies back through time. I chose that. Every time a song came on the radio that did not make me wince, I thanked future me. Every time the dog slept at my feet and did not chase phantom cars in his dreams, I thanked future me. Eventually, I did not check my ex's accounts. I did not drive past the shop. I did not measure the exact distance between the past and the present. I let the mural near the river be a mural and not a map. Then, on a gray Tuesday, the justice of the peace from the Civic Center called me. He said he had never seen anything like what happened after I objected. He said that an old woman who wears too much perfume and sells raffle tickets at every event had told him the town was under a spell and that someone had finally spoken the counterspell. He asked me if I would consider making a brief statement at the wedding reception, a hopeful note for the children, a blessing for peace in a community that loves its drama too much. I told him I would think about it. I did not want to be a character in a pageant. I wanted to be a father who shows up, a man who can look in a mirror and not see a punchline. That night I walked without music and listened to the soft sounds of a neighborhood that will outlast every scandal. A flag clicked softly against a pole. A sprinkler ticked across a lawn. Somewhere a garage door rattled shut, and for once it did not sound like a heart. I decided that if I took the microphone at all, I would say one thing only. I would say that love is a machine that runs on truth, and that no matter how pretty the paint or how new the tires, a lie in the engine will shake the whole car to pieces. I would say that I wish everyone safe travels, and I would mean it. Americans like to believe in the ridiculous as long as it is wrapped in romance, and nothing proved that better than the invitation I received. Thick cream paper, embossed lettering, tied with a ribbon that smelled faintly of motor oil and hairspray. It was the official notice of the wedding between my ex, the cheating wife who detonated our family like a backyard firework, and the mechanic who once gave me a discount on brake pads. The return address was the shop itself, as if the grease-stained walls had learned calligraphy overnight. Inside, besides the date and the venue, there was a polite little card that asked guests to consider gifts or financial contributions toward the continued healing of our family narrative. I read it twice because satire should not arrive by mail. There it was, a direct request for me to fund a wedding built on infidelity, betrayal, and the sort of American boldness you usually see on reality television where contestants try to sell broken blenders for $500,000. The absurdity kept growing. A week later, I was copied on an email chain titled Shared Responsibilities for Shared Healing. It had line items, venue rental, flower arrangements, vegan taco truck, live band, even a balloon arch shaped like a heart being repaired by a wrench. At the bottom was my suggested share. It was more than I had ever spent on a family vacation. When I asked my ex why she thought this was remotely appropriate, she said in a tone Americans reserve for self-help seminars that family is about shared burdens and shared joy. And she said that if I refused, the children would see me as the bitter parent, the one clinging to betrayal instead of embracing growth. That word again, betrayal, hung in the air like exhaust, the truth hidden under perfume. I laughed, and it was not the soft laugh of acceptance, but the sharp bark of a man who has seen a conspiracy unravel. Because by then I had convinced myself there was a larger plot. Not just a cheating wife, not just a mechanic with poetic knuckles, but a full-scale experiment in social psychology. Maybe the government was testing how far one man could be pushed before he became a folk tale. Maybe late-night radio callers were right. We were living in a simulated reality, and I was the chosen subject for the episode called Paying for Infidelity, a Patriotic Duty. I even pictured lab-coated bureaucrats taking notes as I read the invoice. They probably bet on whether I would pay or blow up the reception with a speech about family and betrayal. So I decided to lean into parody. I showed up at their wedding rehearsal, not to sabotage, but to observe. Picture this: a community hall strung with lights borrowed from the county fair, folding chairs in uneven rows, a DJ testing the speakers by blasting a country love song about tractors. My ex floated in, radiant, as if betrayal were a skincare product. The mechanic adjusted his tie with hands that looked out of place in silk. They saw me and froze. I raised a paper cup of soda and said, "Do not worry, I am just here to see what my money might have bought." That earned me glares from her bridesmaids, who were dressed like patriotic cheerleaders of infidelity. During the rehearsal dinner, which doubled as a potluck because apparently even destiny has a budget, the best man gave a speech about second chances. He spoke about courage, about finding love where you least expect it, about how the mechanic fixed more than cars, he fixed hearts. Every sentence was a nail in the coffin of seriousness. I half expected him to unveil a PowerPoint presentation with before and after pictures of our family, arrows pointing toward destiny. The crowd applauded, forks clinking against paper plates, as if betrayal were a national holiday. Then came the audacious moment. The wedding planner, clipboard in hand, approached me. She whispered that the couple was hoping I would cover the cost of the string quartet. She said music heals, and it would be a beautiful gesture of support. I stared at her, thinking how only in America could a man be asked to pay for the soundtrack of his own humiliation. I asked her if she had ever heard of the term infidelity. She nodded, unfazed, and replied, "Of course, but we prefer to call this a transition of the heart." I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled, because parody had fully overtaken tragedy. If they wanted me to be the villain, the bitter ex-husband, I would give them something else entirely, a narrator. I began drafting my speech, not the one they expected, but the one they feared. I would not shout or throw punches. I would tell the truth in front of their guests, calmly, like a man reading a weather report. I would remind everyone that this celebration was not born of courage, but of secrecy, not of destiny, but of betrayal, not of honesty, but of a cheating wife who thought she could rewrite history with balloons and champagne. The conspiracy part of my brain even imagined the outcome. The string quartet would pause mid-song. Guests would murmur. Someone would record it on their phone, and by morning my words would be on social media. A viral clip titled, "Ex-Husband Shuts Down Infidelity Wedding with Brutal Truth." There would be comments, debates, strangers taking sides. Some would call me petty, others would call me heroic. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally step out of the role of victim and into the role of author. Because that was the hidden truth of betrayal. It is not just about losing love, It is about losing the story you thought you were living. My ex-wife tried to take that story, tear it up, and hand me a bill for the sequel. But I would not pay for fiction. I would not fund a lie. If there was going to be a sequel, it would be mine to write, in my voice, in my time. And if that sequel had to begin with me standing at a microphone at a wedding I was never meant to attend, then so be it. The morning of the wedding arrived like the opening scene of a satire dressed as a Hallmark movie. The sky was the kind of fake blue you see on postcards, the grass too green from the groundskeeper's fertilizer, and the air buzzing with small-town gossip disguised as polite chatter. I drove up to the Civic Center parking lot, the same place where I once watched my kids' basketball game, now transformed into a shrine for infidelity, dressed in white lace and rented chandeliers. SUVs lined the lot, and I swear half the county was there, drawn by the promise of scandal. In America, nothing fills seats like betrayal that you can witness up close without paying for cable. I wore a suit, not to blend in, but to sharpen the edges of my plan. I carried no gift, no envelope stuffed with cash, only a folded speech and the calm of a man who has walked through fire and come out smelling of smoke and certainty. People stared as I entered, whispering as if I were a ghost. My ex, the cheating wife who once swore before God and the DMV that we would build a family forever, stood at the altar radiant, glowing like betrayal had been turned into a skincare routine. Beside her stood the mechanic, hands scrubbed clean but still shaped by years of torque wrenches and lies. The ceremony began with a pastor who looked too young to know heartbreak, speaking about second chances and redemption as though he had been handed a script written by a reality television producer. Every word dripped with the suggestion that this marriage was noble, that infidelity was just a misstep, that betrayal could be polished into destiny. Guests nodded, murmured affirmations, as if they were in on some cosmic joke I had not been invited to understand. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, I rose. Gasps echoed like cymbals. Phones came out of pockets because this was the American moment everyone had paid nothing to attend but everything to gossip about later. I unfolded my speech. My voice was steady, my hands still. I said, "This is not about love. This is about betrayal dressed in white, about infidelity rewritten as romance, about a cheating wife who decided that family could be traded like parts in a scrapyard. You ask me to pay for this wedding, but I will not. I will not invest in deceit. I will not finance betrayal, and I will not sign my name under a story that began with lies in a garage." The mechanic stiffened. My ex's smile cracked like porcelain dropped on concrete. Guests shifted in their seats, caught between the thrill of drama and the discomfort of truth. I pressed on. I told them how my children had been asked to smile in family photos with a man who broke their family. I told them how my ex sent me invoices as if betrayal could be itemized like a grocery bill. I reminded them that family is not a performance, it is a covenant, and once broken, it cannot be mended with string lights and a taco truck. Silence fell heavy. Then from the back someone clapped. Just once. Sharp. Then another joined. And suddenly the hall filled with applause, not unanimous, but enough to tilt the balance. People were standing, not for the bride, not for the groom, but for the audacity of truth spoken plainly. My ex's face flushed red, her eyes flashing with the rage of a woman who thought she could control the narrative. The mechanic squeezed her hand, but his shoulders sagged as if even he knew the play was over. I walked out before the pastor could regain order, before my ex could summon her counterattack, before the audience could turn me into either villain or hero. Outside, the air was cooler, the sky less plastic. I breathed. For the first time in months, I breathed without bitterness choking me. The wedding continued inside, but it no longer mattered. Their vows would always carry the echo of my objection. Their rings would always feel heavier than gold. Later that night, I sat on my porch with my dog at my feet and a beer in my hand. The town would talk, of course. Some would call me cruel. Some would call me brave. Most would just relish the drama like a sitcom rerun. But I did not care. Because the real victory was mine, I refused to let betrayal dictate the story. I refused to let a cheating wife charge me admission to the circus of her choices. I reclaimed the narrative, not with fists or fire, but with words, steady and clear, in the very place where she thought she could crown herself Queen of Destiny. And that, I realized, was the final act of revenge. Not petty, not cruel, but righteous. I gave her exactly what she feared most, a reminder that truth cannot be erased, that family is not for sale, that betrayal carries a price she alone must pay. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, not to her, not to the mechanic, but to myself. You survived. You endured. You told the story. Because in America, stories are power, and mine was no longer about a cheating wife and her mechanic groom. It was about me, standing tall, laughing at the absurdity, and walking forward into a life where betrayal was only the prologue, not the ending.